All right. Welcome, everybody. We're going to talk about starting a career in tech today. What does that even mean? What is a career in tech? What is tech? What the heck can you do? All that kind of stuff. So my name is Jacob Miller. I'm just going to kick things off today, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jordan, who's going to be our kind of main host. I'll be co-hosting, but Jordan will help guide the discussion today. But before we jump in, thanks everybody for joining us. It looks like we have about 8 people viewing already, which is amazing. So thanks for being here. So this is part of Startup Wisconsin Week. I'm presenting out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, along with Jordan. But I think Scott's in Lower Michigan, and Damiano, you're in Texas, right? Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for being part of it. But the mission of Startup Wisconsin is to connect, educate, inspire, and grow the tech startup communities across the state of Wisconsin. So if you're joining us and you're not from Wisconsin today, that's totally fine. But it's just part of Startup Wisconsin Week. And you can learn more at startupwi.org. And one more thing I want to share is just thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to Headway and Nicolay National Bank for supporting us all across the state. And then in Green Bay, we have St. Albert College, the Chamber, Cellcom, LiveX, Von Briesen, The Village, Machine Plus, Baycare, Bank First, Bayer, Performance Marketing, New North, and University of Wisconsin Green Bay. So thank you to all of you for supporting Startup Week in 2022 and beyond. So, all right, enough about that. I can stop sharing my screen. We can jump over to Jordan and we can kick things off.
Awesome. Well, that was great to hear from the sponsors because all of this is possible with them. So thank you for that. I think the intros would be probably the best place. So maybe I'll be the last one, but if we want to go around the horn and just maybe from whenever as far back as you want to today to just give us a little bit more about who you are and what you do. So I don't know if Scott, you maybe want to jump to start.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, so currently I'm an Android and mobile developer here at Headway. I've been a software developer for over 5 years now, but I was not always a software developer. I was an economics major in college, kind of expecting to work in finance, but I graduated in the depths of a recession, so kind of had to change course. Ended up working non-technical roles, but within an IT department. So we might talk a little bit later about what is a role in tech. But I was a process analyst and a data analyst in mostly non-technical capacities within a global logistics firm. And then my data analysis and love of crunching numbers led me to learn Python, and that led me into the world of software development, which is where I am now. And then favorite things to do when not at work. I love golfing. And I love crunching data of all kinds. And one example is in golf, there are 4 major tournaments. And somebody tweeted, which golfer has done better in a major most times consecutively? Like who has placed 40th and then 30th and then 29th and then, and I was like, wait, I have the data for this. And so I could look it up and find out which golfer holds the current longest streak for placing better in a major than the previous one. So that's one example. I just like to keep lists and spreadsheets on stuff that I care about.
Who was it?
Oh,
Scott, who was the person?
It was Tommy Fleetwood. And I think that was as of the 3rd major of the year. So I think his streak ended with the 4th and final major of this year. So I'm not sure who currently holds that streak.
Currently. More data to crunch. Sorry there, Dummy. If you want to jump in.
It's hard to top Scott's intro because I don't really have that much to say about myself, but I'm currently a senior designer here at Headway, dabble with all things no code as well. I'm looking forward to to sharing some of these things that we learn on a daily basis here at Headway and just generally working in tech. Outside of work, I work. So I'm very passionate about software, very passionate about what's happening in the startup space, starting to do a little bit of founder to founder advisory on the side, just to kind of, give back to the community that I get so much from. So this is the reason why I'm here too. Just happy to share whatever I can with folks who might be interested in getting in.
Jacob, do you want to?
Yeah, for sure.
If we don't know who you are.
Yeah. And before I jump in, though, there's a couple of folks I know it looks like someone on YouTube said hello, looking forward to this. I know Andrew said hey. So we got so if anyone has any questions as we're going along about anything we're sharing, be sure to leave it a comment, and whether it's on LinkedIn or YouTube, we'll be able to share it and talk through it together. So just want to shout that out. But yeah, so my name's Jacob Miller. I'm the marketing and brand manager here at Headway, and I also help organize events like this all the time, and specifically this week for Startup Wisconsin Week. So that's kind of all the things that I get involved with. Trying to think, before I got into tech, I worked in grocery stores for like 8 years while I was like in school and stuff. For a while, I was like, oh, maybe this is my backup plan. Worked at a local grocery store in Upper Michigan where I used to live. Worked at a local grocery store in Wisconsin called Festival Foods. Worked my way up into like a manager role, like a floor manager role. Did forklift, all that kind of stuff, but very thankful that I kind of like was able to transition from grocery store to video and photo production, and now marketing and managing teams and talent and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been a great journey. Favorite thing to do when I'm not at work, probably just like camping and fishing. I do enjoy like writing music, but it's been a while since I've done that. But I would say just time in the outdoors with family and friends is kind of my favorite thing to do when I'm not working.
That's good. Thank you for that, Jacob. Thank you for filling in the role of the host to tell people they could put their comments on the side. Obviously,
Sure.
You can tell this is my second rodeo, so this is going to be loosey goose, but that's how we like it on StreamYard. So who am I? I'm Jordan Ogren. I'm the marketing manager for My Talent Planner. We're a SaaS startup in the Wisconsin area, Green Bay area specifically. So how I got here originally, I also, like Jacob, was doing some work at Elmers County Market in Escanaba, Michigan. I was bagging people's groceries, so it was very fun to see what people were buying and how much of it they were buying. And then I got into lifeguarding, which was also an amazing career that totally prepared me for what I'm doing today. And then from there, I got this job as a marketer 4 years ago, and then the company that I worked for created this My Talent Planner software. So I'm still working for that company, just in a little different capacity. And one of my favorite things to do is to find the fries that fall in between the seat and eat them just for a little bit of extra nutrition on days where maybe I don't have as much food in. You kind of get that dopamine of, hey, I found the fry and I get to enjoy it. So that's a little bit about me. If you guys don't have anything, I don't see any questions. I think right away for me, it would be helpful just to get some definitions on the table. When we think of career in tech, everybody that's watching this has their own maybe definition or mind, but I think it could be valuable that we take some time to define it first before we get into, okay, how do you even secure a job in tech if we don't even are clear on that? So does anybody want to maybe start out with their definition? We talked offline a little bit about it, but if somebody wants to jump into what they think career in tech means, or what it means to work in tech.
I can jump in. I think a good place to start is most, if not all, employees in tech are knowledge workers, meaning there's not a physical thing that we need to do to provide value in our jobs. And then as far as on the now, admittedly, there are knowledge workers that probably don't work in tech, right? But then on the company side, there are companies that are making tech products, either Google search or an iPhone, or but then there are also companies that make cars or retail goods, but all of those companies need to have a large technical component these days. And so it's kind of a murky definition, but really I think about it as you're a knowledge worker, and mostly for a company that sells some sort of a leveraged product. Now, one example I brought up is Nabisco, right? They're selling crackers. Their developers are absolutely tech workers, right? Their marketers are tech workers. But those are maybe some light guardrails around what it means to be working in tech.
Yeah, I think that it's such a broad space. You could be working at a absolute startup, or you could aspire to work at one of the big 4 or 5 Googles and Amazons of the world. So I think it's very different. I feel like we do interface sort of the full spectrum, especially here at Headway. We're able to work with first-time founders and very seasoned founders alike. So I'll be interested in getting a little bit more, you know, I'm starting to see some questions coming in the chat. So because it's so broad, it'll be interesting to have some more specifics so that we can perhaps give a little bit more precise answers.
Yeah, I just want to jump in maybe to round off the discussion on the definitions. Is it like if you're working a career that wasn't here 10, 15 years ago, is that like another way to think about, like, is that some way to start to define, oh, am I in a career in tech, is kind of doing something, so you're marketing, but you're marketing things that weren't around 15, 20 years ago per se, where if you work at like the car shop as a marketer, I don't think I would consider that tech because you're still selling, like, and that might not even be a great proxy either for thinking about like am I selling something, am I doing something, because like I think futuristically when I hear tech or a career in tech, it's like futuristic things which then are based in, they weren't in the past, or they weren't as frequent in the past. But we are getting some questions, so enough. I love definitions, so I could sit here all day. Scott, did you have something you want to jump in on? Sorry.
Yeah, I think often when people talk about getting into tech, there are aspects of a tech career that are very attractive. Either it's less physically taxing, right, than a physically demanding job. Maybe the hours are better or more solid or known. Maybe the compensation is better. Maybe you have flexibility of where you can work. And so I think a lot of, you know, it might not be all of those for everybody, right? But usually some of those are big reasons why someone wants to work in tech. Because if you are a writer, you don't have to work for a tech company, right? You can do all kinds of writing jobs. But if you're doing it for like in tech or a tech company, you can get a lot of those benefits of the career that you wouldn't get otherwise. So the question, like, would the people working on the manufacturing line of a Tesla gigafactory be tech workers? Well, I mean, they're working on tech, right? So I'm not using the label to either elevate tech workers or not elevate non-tech workers, but they have to physically go to the factory. It's a physically demanding job. And it means that a lot of the attractive career aspects of working in tech are not available, right? And so it's not about better or worse or hierarchical or anything like that. It's just that you physically have to go to that location. You have to live near a gigafactory, right? I love working remotely because if I change jobs or move or, if I move, I don't have to also change my employment, right? And that's like day-to-day peace of mind. Whereas if you're a factory worker or a welder, if all of those jobs disappear in your physical location, you have to change physical locations. And that's not the case for a lot of tech jobs.
No, that's really good. Angie answered a question, so I appreciate that. So I think we're way up in this high atmosphere, which I think is good to play. But I see a question about actually talking about how we landed our first career or first tech job. I think we may come back to some of these more high level conversations, which I'm getting a lot of value from. But I think if we can answer this one, I think we'll go real kind of drill into like the specifics or the actualities of how to do it. So does anybody want to jump in? Maybe Jake, do you want to jump in on how you landed your first?
Sure. Yeah. So to just kind of like set it up, like the two biggest factors that kind of helped me go from grocery store to just, you know, photo and video production in a general sense, which is what I went to school for, to working in the technology industry or software industry specifically here at Headway was I was putting my work out there and I was putting myself out there publicly on the internet in communities that I wanted to be involved in, such as, you know, software as a service, so SaaS companies and digital product companies. And then two, I was constantly building relationships with people in my local community within tech startups and also online, going back to the like sharing everything I'm thinking about, things I'm learning, you know, just opinion pieces, whatever, or creative work. So my videos and my photography work. And that all started in around 2011 or so when I was just about done with school for video production and photography. And my first opportunity was because I was publishing so much content of my own content online. One of my older teachers from previous semesters who had always been following my work said, "Hey, I know someone looking for talent such as yourself to be added to the marketing team at a large corporation." So I got the intro, had coffee, didn't have to do the formal process like everyone was, like submitting your resume and all this kind of stuff. I still had to create a resume for the final meeting with his boss, right? Like there was still some formality, but the opportunity came purely through my network. and by putting good work out there. So there was that. My next opportunity was working at a creative agency, and it was again through my network. My friend's like, hey, you should come stop by our office. At the end of my tour, they asked me if I was interested in joining their team. Right? It's like it's all like putting yourself out there, having those relationships, and then as far as getting a headway, that a lot of that was like my local relationships that I built up by going through those local startup tech events hosted by an org called Digital Fertilizer, and just being a part of that community, like, offering value, like taking photos and video clips or whatever, sharing them for free to help promote the community and build it up. And that was how that worked. And the same thing in tandem happened online. While I was working those other gigs, there was a guy named John Saddington, and he was building his own product, and he invited me to help with community building for his product. He had one called Pressgram for a while. And he had a company called 8-Bit that made WordPress themes. There was all these things I got intertwined with, and it was just really, really cool. And the only reason that happened is because I was putting myself out there, being kind, being generous, and showing my work. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Not dissimilar from you, Jacob. My intro to tech, I guess, started in multimedia as well. I was using software for audio engineering, and through I'm sure that you're familiar with some of the software that I've used as well. There is software building within these softwares. You can customize things. You can build some processes. You can sort of create your own work environments, and through the exposure of multimedia content and things like that, I got more and more passionate about actually building software, designing software, and I started going to school for designing 01. So was it 20 some years ago, and I was doing audio engineering on the side simultaneously. So my first job in tech, if you consider that to be one, that was around that, and it just kind of went up from there, in the sense that I was always interested in how to build things, or how things were built. And through software, you can kind of reverse engineer things and then rebuild them, or build a better version, or build on top of a particular software. So there's multiple definitions to first tech jobs. If you're freelance, you build sites, or you do consulting and all these different things that kind of gravitate around tech. You could consider that to be a tech job. Scott?
My experiences, or my advice, would be similar to Jacob, because my entry into tech was pretty circuitous. I was expecting to learn Python programming to be able to do better data analysis at my job, but not necessarily become a software developer. But then I ended up, through someone that I knew, getting a job as a back-end Perl developer, and then moved on from there to other jobs. And so I think it is important to be sharing what you're doing. Right? I'm learning Python, or I want to get better at data science, or I want to learn web development, and also seek out people that or even that you don't know, that are further along in what you might want to do, because they have the perspective and the experience to give you information that you would be able to get that information less efficiently, right? So I think I'm a pretty introverted person, so the idea of networking has always been really intimidating. But networking is not going to a room of 50 professionals and cold introducing yourself to each of them, right? Like, you can go to, like, I went to a Python meetup of 12 people. I didn't present, right? Maybe I introduced myself at the beginning, but it's not these extremely extroverted things. It's really being curious together about something, right? And I think that can reduce the intimidation.
I love that, being curious together. I had to jot that down there. But just to recap before I answer, I think putting your work out there, building in public, practicing in public, doing work in public is a key. Networking, and just to take what you ended with, Scott, I think it's networking with intention rather than just going to a 50-person meetup for business professionals. It's like, I'm finding Java groups that are specialized in content marketing or Python or whatever. And then it's like people that are also curious to learn with you. So it's just such a lower bar to kind of create the friendships, because you already have, or relationships that maybe can turn to friendships. But no, that's really good. And then what year, Scott, when did you get your first like tech job? And that's kind of hard to define, but like what year, if you could maybe think of.
It was probably like 2016, 2017.
Okay.
So good
So that popped
eight
that popped out
years out of
to
college.
yeah.
That was
Well,
about the
it just
same for me with Head. So again, the last two jobs that I had before Headway weren't necessarily in tech. So again, it's like it was around 2017. Yeah, it was 2017 when I got into this industry.
hmm. Yeah, because I was just gonna note on the fact that like you guys have been in this industry for a bit, so that's maybe something to that. Not that like with podcasts or whatever, you're like, oh, I shouldn't make one because there's so many of them. I think it's still on that end of like you can still get in, but clearly some people have advantages because they've been in these communities or building for years on years on years. So that's something to note, not to discourage, but just to note that it's like it's might take you a little bit to get that perfect or that good great tech career. But so for me, I'm about 5 years. So it was about like 2018 for me. I got my job here. I was going to NWTC, which is a community college in the area, 2-year college, and I was going for digital media technology. I started to realize that video, audio, and all that stuff's great, but if nobody listens or watches it, it's kind of pointless. So then I got more into marketing for those types of things. Content marketing would be one way to phrase it. So then I got this job off a job board. So I guess the only nugget that I can give there is the job was for someone with a bachelor's degree. And I just took my shot because I knew I had the kind of knowledge and I hope I had a level of competence that just made me stand out. So I think that I don't have a ton of great nuggets of like working in public. I did a lot of that after I got my job. And maybe that's like a way that I sustained my job or just to went deeper was doing work in public, writing a daily newsletter or whatever. But for me to get into the field of marketing, which then led me here, was really just yes, you went to NWTC. That's awesome. It's just taking a shot when you think, okay, they need a bachelor's or whatever. It's just kind of if you feel like you're qualified enough, taking a shot. Even if you're not qualified enough, just take that shot because you can learn a lot on the job. And then obviously one other nugget that I can maybe give being in a unique position of kind of only getting my job in tech because it came from a company creating a tech product is it's very beneficial to understand and know all these things because then you can apply whether it's using business models or different types of things. You can apply it to your company if you're thinking about maybe adding a SaaS software. You can be able to lead the conversation. You can be able to at least have some comments. And then usually, not just if you're young, but usually that person will be like, hey, let's put you in charge or put you in that role in that software company. So that was kind of my way in. Is I could have obviously like backed away and just said like, hey, I don't do that type of marketing or just whatever and stayed with our consulting firm. But I was like, this is a future. I think it can definitely help our consulting firm, yada, yada. So again, I just jumped at it when I was clearly underqualified to kind of, I didn't build any of it, but be in that thought process of the build stage of what do we keep, what do we exclude, and all those things. So I think for me, it's just taking a shot when you're underqualified and jumping into things. For me, it was realizing that this is kind of the future. Software will eat the world, as Mark Andreessen said.
Um, when you were talking, it made me think about like tech enablement, because I think that's something that a lot of like, especially since COVID hit, like there's just so many businesses out there that still to this day don't have a good like customer experience around purchasing an item or like pick up for delivery or whatever, like or like just not knowing if they even can deliver food anymore. It's like there's all those questions, and I think there's a ton of opportunity for people. Like if you are into marketing and you want to figure out how to like help businesses in your area become more tech enabled through, like, Google has a bunch of great business tools for people to like improve the way they appear on the internet. Like there's just a ton of stuff out there. And not only that, just like improving website experiences, all that kind of stuff. I think there's a lot of things that people can kind of take baby steps into to like understand like the ecosystem of like different online tools that businesses can leverage. So it's not always like, hey, learn how to code, learn how to design and collaborate with developers, or just like the overall marketing, like as far as like strategy and tactics and all that stuff. I think there's a lot of ways to help like companies that aren't like fully up to date with serving their customers and the tools they could be using and trying to figure out what those can be. So I think it's interesting because you were saying every company is a tech company at some point. and that's kind of like where we're at. We're still in that transition period for a lot of different industries. But we just happen to work within like either building software, designing software, or companies that are creating their own softwares to complement their current services or products that they already create. Which is interesting.
I think that's actually one of the most exciting things that we get to do, to sort of take the so-called legacy businesses and take them digital, as we say. Especially in the recent past, that's been a great opportunity for folks to just be exposed to that possibility. And so you mentioned food deliveries. I mean, there's countless restaurants or just establishments that have now successfully subscribed to the whole delivery system, and that's just one of the many examples. So I think that that's another one of those things that I think we can provide context around, and one of the things that are exciting about working in tech, because we get to sort of expand upon existing businesses and really see them thrive and see them grow, even if they've had a completely different business model for years. So,
Hey Scott, did you have anything to say? I saw you were trying to peep in while I was on my long monologue.
Yeah, you're talking about how you kind of moved into your marketing role, and you used the term unqualified a few times. And I try really hard not to self-select myself into an unqualified bucket, because why would I remove myself from a position before I even, like, it's up to the company to decide if I can provide value and if I'm qualified. And it's really been when I've been job searching that I've gotten the most useful information about market conditions for a certain role, what skills of mine measure up, which ones don't. So it's interesting job searching because you both get useful information, but you also kind of have to almost ignore rejections, because it's not like each rejection is a referendum on your abilities to do your job, but it can still be information on skills that you might want to improve. But I think it's easy to look at successful people in the industry or job descriptions and just say, well, I'm not that good, so like, why try? But I think you'd be surprised.
I also think
mean-
employers are really bad at writing job descriptions.
That's true.
or the HR department or whatever, depending on the size of the company. So
Yeah.
we did have a question come in. I think, Scott, this is probably more your realm. How important is it to focus on a specific tech career like mobile developer, front end, or just generalized, software developer? Any thoughts around that?
I have strong thoughts. And I think tech likes to say that they reward generalist experience, ability to communicate and write. But in my experience, if you don't have a minimum level of technical ability and a very narrow skill, you don't even get into the conversation. And so for a while in my career, I was learning tech kind of across the stack. And so I was maybe a, C developer in both C# backend, Angular HTML front end, and Android development. But I found that my opportunities really changed for the better when I focused on one of them. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't change ever, right? It doesn't mean you're buttonholed into one thing. But my experience has been like, if you tell a recruiter, I have 3 years of experience in both backend and front end, they will pause and then ask, so what is it that you are like applying for or want to do? And it's not helpful to them that you can do both, because companies most often are hiring for a position. Sure, like there are lots of full stack roles still, but even I think your more traditional full stack role is changing into, you're a backend dev optimizing for caching and database queries, or, you're a front end developer optimizing for that part of the stack. That has been my experience.
Yeah, I could see though, how like if you become like a senior developer, whichever niche of development, but then I could see how like someone like a CTO, after a while, they're not just going to be like in the weeds on a certain technology. Like they might have a general awareness of the different technologies they're using or different code bases they're using. Like, do you feel like as a person becomes more of a manager of developers, that becomes less critical, like over time? I'm kind of I know you've
100%.
never you've never been in that position yourself yet, but I'm curious your perspective of working with different dev leaders and how that's been for you.
Right. And I think it completely changes. I think companies don't want to fall into the fallacy of this person was a great developer or marketer or designer, so they will be a great developer manager, marketing manager, designer manager, because it's really a completely different set of skills. Now, I think CTO is kind of straddling the line between being an excellent individual contributor in a technical space and being a manager. But it definitely changes, right? If you're managing people, that's your main goal, right? You should be building up those careers, building your product, and maximizing that. And your technical skills in a specific area matter a lot less. Is what I see from people around me.
Yeah. All right. I wanted to share this question from Jose. Unqualified, how would you say you work past that feeling when you're breaking into tech? Love tech, just feels like if you're not very specialized in a technical field, you're on the outside looking in. So it's funny because I feel like I was like that, like, because I was a general marketer. Like I could do photo, video, animation, a little bit of audio editing. I could write, like I was a self-taught writer, like by blogging a bunch for like 5 or 7 years. And it's like, I just still didn't feel qualified, but I knew I'd put in the work to like have the skill sets, but I just never applied it to this industry. But I think it's different when it comes to like something like Scott, like what you do is obviously it's code. So that's just the nature of that is a technical role. Damiano, obviously like design can be graphic design, but it also can be product design and UX and UI and all that kind of stuff. So for me, I think it was just like the people around me that were asking me to like join them on this thing. Like, for example, Andrew asking me to join Headway, that was the affirmation like in itself. I don't really know how to like get around that feeling, because even to this day I sometimes still feel like, even though I've been doing this for 5 years, there's days where I'm like, what the heck am I doing? Like I've never done this before. And but at the same time, that's okay. Like I think if you ask a lot of people across this industry, every single day they're leveraging Google search to figure out how to get their job done today. So I don't think it's like everybody knows everything all the time. I think knowing that you don't know everything is a good thing too. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, there's a term that we use quite often, which is imposter syndrome. So I think that the sooner you learn how to live with that, the better off you'll be. I think it's completely normal. And there's another expression that we use, which is software is never done. Obviously, there's always improvements, but there's always new versions and new libraries and new frameworks and new whatever. So I think that you're always going to be unqualified. It's sort of like your whatever iPhone, Android OS comes out today, it's obsolete the moment it comes out. So you're gonna have to learn the new version in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 months. I think it's actually a positive. I think it keeps you on your toes, and as long as you're curious and you want to find value that you can tap into, I think that's gonna be your best bet. And technical field is I guess maybe the easier thing to tap into, because there's going to be documentation, there's going to be things that you can learn in a tangible way. But I guess the attitude and the curiosity and the spirit of adventure, if you will, that's something that if you have, it's gonna make you very successful, I believe.
Jose's question is a really tough one. I know that I follow Android developers on Twitter, and it's easy to read a 20 tweet long thread about performance profiling Java bytecode in the Square code base. And you're like, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to learn that in 12 years, right? But that's not really the measuring stick. And so it's hard to know like what the measuring stick is. But I find that if you can find people to learn alongside with who are more at your level, then you have the feedback of like, oh, I didn't get this, but then I do. And then there's something that I get that they don't get yet. And I can help them, rather than just going on social media or watching conference talks of people who are literally the top of their field that have been doing it for 2 to 3 times the length that I have. Those aren't the correct comparisons for me to make. And at the end of the day, any amount of comparison probably isn't useful. But I find that having a peer that is as much of a peer as possible kind of helps stave off that feeling of unqualified.
Yeah. Do we want to jump to this other one? Looks like Marcos, comment from Marcos here. Can you talk about the flexibility on remote tech work? How the companies are seeing the shift from work hours to focus on production, managing delivery, follow-ups, and meetings? I know, I'm sure, I don't work on client work specifically at Headway, but I know Scott and Damiano, you do. So I don't know if you two want to speak to kind of the balance of flexibility in your hours, but also, be able to show up to meetings, and just kind of like how we approach that here.
Yeah, I mean, it's all I know. I never really not worked remotely, which I think was very lucky when when a lot of companies started going remotely. Nothing had changed for me, so I think I can speak to that. I think our management is still something that we talk about quite a bit, because you might have an epiphany in the middle of the night, and you will wake up and solve that bug and do something that maybe you were banging your head against for, I don't know, the entire 8-hour shift that you were trying to be productive on. So I think there's a level of accountability when it comes to delivery, follow-ups, and meetings, and so that's something that probably you want to stay within those business hours. I do have those late night epiphanies quite a bit, and so I will maybe schedule a Slack message for the next morning at 6:30. To me, that's business hours. So hopefully, by 8 a.m., the client stakeholder will receive it. But I think it might have to do with with self-discipline. If you don't really prioritize work and you just do other things throughout the day or throughout the night, whenever work inspiration hits, and you can't really stick to those deliverables, or you're late to meetings because maybe you stayed up all night doing other things. That might be a problem. But I think that it really does come down to your personal style. And again, you might wake up in the middle of the night. I don't deny myself that opportunity, because I could really tell you stories about how I was trying to do something for even weeks sometimes. And maybe because I was in that mental loop for 2 weeks, then it just hit me at once. But yeah, I mean, meetings, follow-ups, deliveries, those things you definitely want to be on top of. And I think certain companies are more generous than others in terms of responsibility and how much trust they give you. And I personally feel that, if you're given that responsibility and that trust, you should give back as much, as you're given, I guess. So.
Yeah. Speaking about Headway provides almost as much flexibility as they possibly can within a remote working setup, where I'm not told when to start. I'm not told when to finish. There are job expectations, right? And then there are random meetings that might be 5 to 6:30 my time, right? But I feel like I have the autonomy to ask, like, hey, can we not have this be a recurring weekly meeting? Or so I think it works both ways, right? It's a job, you have work expectations, but we're also extended a lot of flexibility so that we can work when it's optimal for us. One thing that I was not prepared for going from working in an office full time to working remotely full time was, when you're in an office, you kind of just treat time at the office as your working time, whether or not you are actually working during 100% of that time, right? But now when you move to a fully remote environment, I feel like I've been a lot more critical about, was I working or not? And so I might actually end up working more hours than I was working before I was working remotely. And I think that's, especially during pandemic, you might have seen some more burnout from people that actually were working more hours because, I took a 15-minute bathroom break. Where if you're in an office full time, you're not clocking in and logging the time. I mean, unless you're an Amazon warehouse worker, but so that was definitely a change, right? And so it's always a balance because you want to be doing a great job. You want to be doing right by your employer that is extending you this flexibility in a privileged position, right, to work remotely. Um, but it is also easy to burn yourself out if you're really, really critical and not giving yourself the breaks that you need.
I have nothing to add for that one. So Jacob, do you have anything?
No, I think kind of both what Scott and Damiano had shared. Like, I definitely sometimes, if I'm working from home, and sometimes it happens even at the office, is like end of the day, like you just start to get in a groove, and it's like you're going and going, and then sometimes you just like don't realize how much extra time you're putting into something. But at the same time, it's like as Damiano shared, like, but if you're up super late the night before and like you have certain meetings on the calendar, you just have to make sure that your lifestyle is supporting like your job, your job kind of like time frame. So you still have to like show up to meetings that are scheduled, and usually for Headway, it's like they're during the daytime between 8 and 5. For the most part, there are a couple that may be earlier or a little later depending on time zone differences with remote work happening. But for the most part, it's like, yeah, the accountability is there. And if you're not showing up to the meetings and if you're not getting your work done between those meetings, then conversations happen, right? Like, so it's like, it's a huge trust thing. Every company's different. But at Headway, that's how we do it. There's a lot of trust in each other. And that accountability is really strong. And so, yes, I think it's just being smart about it and taking care of yourself and taking care of your work. So.
And it Scott, before this, you said you were in the office. I personally, like I said, I never really was. So for me, the whole like headphones or blasting music or coffee shop reality, that's always been the case for me. But that might be distracting to some. Maybe the fact that you have that freedom to put music on, or sip on coffee, or not have to be in physical meetings constantly. Maybe that's a disadvantage to some. So I think that now we have the option. So a lot of tech companies are still in person, and I think if you have the opportunity to try what it's like to be in an office or not be in an office. For me, it's very beneficial to be in person for certain things, whereas it's disruptive for me to be in person for other things. Um, so, so I think that if you have the opportunity to try both, you know your answer, and every employer is different. Expectations are different. Deadlines are different. You might have some more extended timelines for certain projects. Some might be last minute things. So, some meetings might be every day. We have daily stand-ups with some clients. That's every day. With some, it's every other day. With some is every other week. So, so that flexibility is really up to you to determine if it's a good or a bad thing.
Yeah, just because we're hyping it up doesn't mean that a career in tech is right for everybody. So that's key. I think as we're talking about it, you can start to realize I like the 8 to 4 because it's pretty mindless to just know I'm going in every day at this time. But there are tons of beneficial aspects if you're someone who likes a little more flexibility or just likes to maybe optimize their states of their chronotype. Okay, at this period, I'm most creative, so I want to work. I don't want to be in meetings during 8 to 11, or it could be 8 at night to 11 p.m. is most creative, and I can't work at the office at that time because the lights go out at 10 or whatever. So, yeah, I think as you're hearing, hopefully the listener on the other side is starting to maybe figure out like, oh, that sounds like I could blossom in that soil, or I actually would rot in that soil. So thinking about kind of yourself to apply it to this, which is kind of the question that the person had about like even just like how do I get into tech? Do I developer, that seems to be like an easy way. But I think you always have to base it on like who you are. Scott, you're kind of that introvert. It doesn't make sense where you landed, but it makes sense you're not like a marketer that's like, hey guys, look at me, like let's talk. Like, so there's a huge critical, and obviously at my talent planner, like we do a lot of behavioral science, so we focus on that of like kind of fitting a job is kind of critical. I would suck as a software developer because I don't do anything for 8 hours other than sleep straight. So I just can't do things in long periods. I need people. I need this. I need that. So I know that if I want to get in tech, it has to be different than software developer or even designer, because I'm broke with designing stuff. I'm just horrible at that.
The one thing I do want to say before we jump, there's one more question, which I think is a good one. But I think the one thing with remote work, and it's funny because starting at Headway, most of the team actually was in Green Bay, and now it's the like complete opposite. And I think again, going back to like just knowing yourself, like, do you like to be surrounded by people when you work? Does that give you energy? Do other people give you energy? If you're looking to do remote work, and I don't think this is necessarily just introvert extrovert thing, but if you feel like you need to have like a relationship with your coworkers remotely, it is going to be more difficult, and you have to be way more intentional about it, whether it's scheduling things outside of work together or like scheduling like a lunch together or whatever those things are. Or what we do at Headway is we have twice a year, we have these team weeks where we're getting to get the whole company's getting together for 2 separate weeks of the year. Because otherwise we never really see each other in real life. And those bonding experiences are really important for creating this camaraderie and just trust and just better understanding each other and like what's going on in our lives. Because a lot of those things can help create higher performing teams. And so, and it's just fun, right? Just like getting together. So I think just something to remember is like, as you get into remote work, it will be more work to have stronger relationships at the workplace. Not everybody wants that, and every company's culture is different, but that's something that we make pretty important here, is just making sure we find time to get to know each other. Like even last week, we have this rotating call on Fridays where like we ended up doing breakout rooms, and we just got to talk with random people from across the country that we don't normally get to work with on a daily basis. And it's just good to hear how things are going for them, you know, things that are coming up or how their summer was or whatever that thing is. So it's just something I wanted to note there. So I'm going to grab Marcos's question. I think it was Marcos with another question. Oh, no, see here. I think this is a really good one. Have you had any mentors in tech or before you got into tech? Can you talk a little bit about the value of finding that person when you're starting a career? I don't think I had that person. So I don't know if anyone else, like, I just kind of, again, I was very self-motivated, Googling and going on Twitter and whatever, like just researching as much as I could and just putting myself out there. I don't know if anyone else here has had like a mentor themselves.
Twitter's where it's at. That's where the mentors are. Yeah, I mean, not specifically about career. I think career, especially these days, and I think there might be a question coming up about layoffs, but career is such a volatile, thing. I would say, not necessarily. So I've had a lot of accidental / virtual mentors. So people might say one thing that I then was able to apply to what I do in ways that were not expected. And generally speaking, I heard from someone one time that this individual was not okay. Loud noise coming from upstairs. We'll find out what it is in a second. And I heard that this individual was not able to, or actually was reluctant to admit that the technology that they were working with was soon to become obsolete. And at that time, at that point in my life, I was in design. I was doing certain things that kind of made me question whether or not I should pursue or expand upon what I was doing within design, which I did. And I'm here today, but I know that other folks have not in my circle at the time. And so it's I think it's about catching these glimpses of future, like what's going to happen in the future. We use certain software today that we didn't 5 years ago, because that particular software did not exist 5 years ago. I'm not going to name any names. And some folks that did not want to adapt to that particular new wave of software, I don't know that they're getting a lot of opportunities right now, because most things that are actually going to transfer into a career probably have to do with you being able to either program in a certain language, be aware of certain frameworks and libraries, be in the know. And so I think that future looking piece was something that I accidentally picked up from someone who was discussing that particular event. And so yeah, I don't know that there's one person that you can find that's going to say, hey, because in my past I was able to be successful here, you are going to be able to go into the future. Because it's kind of, I don't think it's going to work. I think that what worked 30 years ago is not going to work today, and it's not going to work in 30 years from now. But it's always about checking Twitter, see what other people are talking about, see what new software is coming out. We're talking about tech. And have a little bit of intuition around the future, what the future is going to look like. So, crystal ball.
I wanted to see how long we could go with nobody saying anything there, so I had to break the silence. Sorry, we might have hit a record there, 42 seconds. Yeah, I would have to align with that. I didn't have a mentor either. I would actually say for me, I've changed some mentors. Like Gary Vaynerchuk was somebody that got me into like marketing realm. Now he's like an anti-mentor for me. He's like everything I don't want to be. So I think that's also like an insight too, is sometimes having like anti-mentors or like anti role models. It's like I want to do everything the opposite of this person, because sometimes you're just looking for the perfect picture. But to your point, like nobody can tell you exactly how to get a career. So sometimes it's just looking at other people of like, hey, I see this person working 80 hours. Like I don't want that. I want like more of a calm working environment. So then you can then base that off of, well, I could get that elsewhere, or remote work with tech could help me get that calm career, or just not. But then also to your point too about, I think one thing that I like to do is not predict the future, position myself for the future. So it's hard to predict the future, but I think one of the best things you can do to position yourself for the future, if you're a designer, if you're a marketer, using that is like just get into or have a pulse on like tech, the tools people are using and all that. Because even if you don't work for a tech company, as a designer, mastering Figma is just helpful, I feel. So that's something that is like applicable for me as a marketer, that like trying to bulletproof or trying to ensure my career doesn't go extinct is like working in tech or working in the things that are becoming new today. So that's like a way to position yourself, is to just have a pulse. And honestly, working in tech is a little bit of a way to position yourself to not, even though Marcos did ask how we feel about the 10,000 people getting let go at Meta and all those, but there's not enough time on this show for that. No, I'm just kidding. Maybe we got 6 minutes left.
I
That's
mean,
it's a big
yeah,
topic.
it's very unfortunate. Like that's like the first thing we'll all say. It's like it sucks. It's not a good thing. But there are a lot of other opportunities out there. It's like obviously like those companies, those larger organizations are a huge magnet for talent because they pay very well, a lot of great benefits. It's great on your resume, all that kind of stuff. But if you're like looking to get into technology or into the tech industry or software, like there's a ton of amazing other companies out there that have smaller teams. Because that's one thing I will say is there's benefits to joining a larger company that's maybe a corporation size, and going and getting into like their system of employment, because you can learn a lot from like how it's all set up. But there's also a ton of benefit from being like the first hire on a certain team, or like internship at a startup or a smaller startup of like 10 to 20 people. Like those are all different experiences. And so I don't think like obviously these layoffs suck, but at the same time, it's really cool to see people on Twitter, LinkedIn sharing all the other amazing tech companies and startups out there that are currently hiring and haven't filled those positions yet. So like, I think, it's like, yes, it sucks, but there's also a ton of other opportunity out there.
Yeah, I think this is a Scott question, because Scott is very tapped into finance and markets and things like that. So I'd be interested to hear your uh, feedback on that. But personally, not afraid, meaning that, if they're just adjusting whatever they're adjusting, it, we don't really know what's happening inside these companies, and they're so big that one could say they were bloated to begin with, they were overstaffed to begin with, and so I don't know that they're slashing 11,000 developers. Maybe they are. So maybe they're tech companies, but are they slashing jobs in the actual technology portion of it? Maybe, maybe not. I know from personal experience, a friend of mine just recently got laid off from one of these companies, and he was, adjacent to our field. So maybe doing that too. So who knows? But I think that, as we touched upon earlier, even legacy businesses are now confronted with the reality of you must have a tech component to your business, whether you're grandma's bakery, mom and pop's hardware store, you got to have a tech component to it. So those 11,000 times, however many companies have performed that adjustment, there's nothing but opportunities out there. If the big ones are slashing staff, there's smaller, as Jacob was saying, there are smaller teams that might be culturally more inclined to hire these folks and take their expertise to facilitate these kind of digital migrations. But Scott, I'm very interested in what you think about this.
I mean, my pulse on the market is we are in a recession, but while there's lots of layoffs, there also seems to be a lot of hiring in a lot of places. I recently listened to a podcast. I'll put the link in our private chat if there's a way you want to throw the link somewhere, Jacob. But where, I think he was a designer and got laid off, but he's calling it the era of defensive employment for employees. And I think it's kind of a stark reminder that if certain realities happen, right, like the economic market or a bad decision by someone in management, that employees are disposable, right? And so that's why I think it's important as employees to take hold of your own career as far as where do you want it to go? How do you want to develop it? Don't expect someone else to develop it for you. Don't expect that your current position is risk-free, regardless of the type of company that you work for, right? There's all kinds of good management, bad management, safe, risky. But regardless of it, I think it's easy to assume that current employment is safer than it really is. And it's up to each individual to advocate for their own career. But I think it is an era of defensive employment, and the more skills that you can accrue and the more that you can, it's kind of like breaking into tech, right? The better network that you have, the more visibility that you have is always going to benefit you, not just when you're breaking in.
Yeah, and I love this comment actually from Steven, because it's true. Like every time there's kind of like, I'm not going to just say recession, but every time there's kind of a shift in the world, that's usually when some big changes happen. And there's a lot, again, going back to a lot of opportunities for companies to kind of pull through and grow and expand. And there's a lot of really healthy companies out there growing and expanding at a much slower pace and a very they're more bootstrap startups or tech companies that are growing at a safer pace than some of these venture-backed companies that get a ton of funding, hire a lot of people, and then have to let go a lot of people because they made the incorrect bet. So, but yes, I think, thanks, Steven, for calling it. I think it's a reminder that lots of opportunity for change in the industry and for new businesses to be created. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad we could end on such a sobering note. No, I'm just kidding. On a great note.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to go if anybody wants to add anything before we end. I didn't really even think of how we were going to end it.
That's okay.
Just being transparent, right?
I have lots more to add, but nothing like directly related to what we were just talking about. So
find Scott on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever he's at. He'll talk to you for a bit about all these economic trends going on.
Yeah. I think that the last thing that I would add, which is probably repeating a lot of the things that we already kind of touched upon, really, working in tech is what it really means for me, it's to have the curiosity to stay in the loop with what's happening. And that can really come from, you don't have to read, established magazines. I think really, even if you're on Twitter, Reddit, wherever you are, right, you might caught glimpses of the future, as I like to call them, from anyone. It could be a solopreneur who's putting out I don't know, like a new little app. It could be somebody who's writing some I don't know, forum or Twitter, threads, whatever. So that to me comes with the job. I mean, you can't just say I got a degree 5, 6, 10 years ago, and then that's the value that I provide. I think that the value that we provide, and I think, Jacob is always posting in Slack multiple times a day, like, this is a new thing that just came out. I mean, you have to be tapped into the community. So I think that's something that if you're curious about, and the folks that are in the chat are of course demonstrating their curiosity by being on this podcast live stream. So just continue doing that, because opportunities will come out of it. I myself was found on Twitter from our head of design, Billy. I was chatting on a Figma thread, and we started chatting. So I mean, you never know, and it's just because of the love for, you can call it innovation. I mean, it sounds a little bit large when I say innovation, but really it might start from that little nugget that somebody's posting in a Twitter thread or whatever that is. And so I think that really comes with the job. So if you're excited about that, you'll be excited to work in tech.
Jacob, do you want to finish this, or like,
yeah,
subscribe,
I
all
get,
that good stuff?
yeah. I mean, well, they don't, they can if they want to. Yeah. So we host this on the Headway channel. This isn't normally a topic that we cover on the Headway YouTube channel, but yeah, if you haven't yet, like and subscribe to the channel. We have content around design and development and product strategy and launching a startup and growing a startup. It's kind of the whole breadth of the startup journey and building great teams. That's what we have on the channel. But I think, I just want to thank everyone for being here. And like, as Damiano said, I think that, again, the curiosity and showing up, like whether it's online or in person, I think that is kind of like the heart of all this stuff. And you just always trying to learn new things and just having a pulse on like what's happening in the market, because you might see opportunities for yourself and like, oh, I'm going to go learn this, and I'm going to just do a fun side project, in my free time, because I really want to learn this thing. And maybe there's opportunities for me someday in that space. So I think it's just having an open mind and being willing to kind of put yourself out there. So remove those limiting beliefs of yourself.
Yes. Thank you guys. This was really fun. I enjoyed it. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.